Hi class. In this video, we're going to be adding some sound to our game with some gameplay sound effects. So those are sound effects that occur when the player jumps or hits the ground, runs into an obstacle, or other events that occur while we're playing the game. We're going to start by generating some sound effects using the JFXR app, and we'll also look at freesound.org, which is a website that hosts sounds that are available under Creative Commons licenses. We'll make some sounds for the player, the obstacles, the items that we might collect. We'll also make a sound for when you win the game and enter a portal or a checkpoint. Once we've created the sounds, we're going to add them into a Godot scene. We're also going to look at code to make the sounds play. It's pretty simple. We're just going to be editing a couple lines. And of course, at the end, we'll post everything on the Open Lab for documentation and to share with other students. So let's get started. JFXR is an audio program. It's based on a Windows application called SFXR. I'll link to this site as well as the original application in the video description. JFXR is specifically designed to generate original sounds that are based on the 8-bit video game sounds of early systems like Nintendo and Atari. So it's a stylized way of creating sound effects that are typical for video games. We can see there's a bunch of default options that match different events in a game, like jumping or getting hit. So let's test one of those out. I'm going to start with the jump sound. You'll see that each time I click the button, it generates a different jump sound. I also have direct control over the parameters that make the sound. So I can play around with those and hear the results as the application plays each new sound. The mutate button will randomize the parameters of a sound that I just played, so I can get some different variations. Let's find a good jump sound and then export it to use in the game. Once I've got the sound I like, I can hit the export button, and that will download a file to my downloads folder. I'll open up the downloads folder and get my project folder, and let's make a new folder for sound design and for this lab, gameplay sound effects. And let's throw the new file in there. It's got a number attached to it because we made a bunch of different jump sounds. So let's just delete that. And we'll use this as the character jump sound. Next, we can create a sound for when the character gets hit by an obstacle or an enemy. There's a couple options we could try here. There's explosion and there's hit/hurt. We can play around with those sounds and see which sounds better. That one sounds pretty good to me, so I'm going to go ahead and download it. I'm going to be relatively quick for the purposes of demonstration, but I encourage you to spend a little bit more time playing around with the different parameters until you get the sound that you like. Now let's make a sound for if the player hits the obstacle. So I'm going to try a couple different things for this. That sounds pretty good to me. So let's download that and rename it. So now I'm going to have two different files with hit at the end. So I want to rename them. I'm going to rename my player files to be player_hit and player_jump. This will help me a little bit with my file organization, so it'll be easier to find the right sound effects when I add them to the game later. Now let's try to find a sound for when the player dies or we have a game over. Okay, that sounds good enough. I could probably spend a lot of time tweaking that one, but for the sake of the demo, let's keep going. Next, I want a sound for when the player collects an item like a coin, or in the case of my examples, an apple. That sounds pretty good for a generic item sound effect. So I'm just going to rename this one item collected. But I may want to have something that's more specific to the item that's in my game, which is an apple. Generating an apple crunching sound on JFXR is not going to be easy. So I'm going to head over to freesound.org. Freesound has sounds that are mostly recorded by hobbyists and published under Creative Commons licenses. So it's good for game developers like us to find realistic sounds to use in our games. You do need an account to download, so you can search through sounds, but unless you create an account, you're not going to be able to download them. So I recommend making an account first and then signing in, and then you can search for a sound. I'm going to search for biting an apple, and this will give me a bunch of sounds, and they have some information like how long they are and what file type they are. I'm going to try out a couple. That first one is actually really good, but let's try a couple more just to check. So that was pretty noisy. That second one was maybe a little more realism than I want. So I'm going to go with the first one. I'm going to go over to that page and click download. And then if I'm using sounds from freesound.org, I also want to make sure that I remember where the sound came from so I can give attribution in my project. So I'm just going to copy this link, and you can put this in your notes somewhere. I'm just going to make a little text file called resources, and I'm just going to save it in the folder with all of my sounds. So that way I don't have to worry about losing it. It'll be easy to see that file there, and I can just find that link if I ever want to give attribution to the person who recorded this sound when I publish my game or share my sound files with another developer. So let's drag that file over. We're going to want to rename it because it has a pretty long name. So let's call this item apple. So that way it will be with all the other item sounds in our folder. Now let's make a sound for when our player collects a life. So that sounds pretty good. I used the power up default for that one. So let's rename that item underscore life and throw that in our folder. There's a sound that I forgot to add earlier, which is when the player lands back on the ground. So after the player jumps, we want to have a sound for when the player hits the ground. So that sounds pretty good. I'm just going to do that pretty quickly and then name that player hits ground and throw that in our folder. Next, I'm going to make a few sounds that we might not add to Godot in this lesson, but could be useful in later lessons. For example, the portal sound when a player goes from one level to the next level, a checkpoint when the player reaches a checkpoint within a level, and I'll make a projectile sound for when the player throws or shoots an item. So these are some good options that we can give a developer or designer to work with in the game. As a sound designer, you may want to create multiple options for the different possibilities, such as multiple different item sounds or a range of different player jump sounds or player getting hit by an obstacle or the player dying sound, to give the developer some options that they can choose from. But this is a good example of the set of sounds that we would need just as the basis to start working with sound in our game. So to start adding your sound files into a Godot project, you can download the sound default project folder from the lab page, or if you already have a project started that you've been working on, just use that one. You can use the same steps for that project. So I'm going to drag this sound project into my MMP 270 folder on my desktop, and then I'm going to copy all of my sound files in there. Again, if you already have a project, skip this step and just copy your files into the project that you've already been working on. So I'm going to find my game sound effects folder and copy it, and then paste it into my project folder. After that, I'm just going to rename this audio. And if I want to put other files in here later, I can do that as well. So now that we've got our sounds, let's open up Godot and we can add the sounds into the scenes where they belong. And then we can adjust the code to make the sounds play. So let's first look at the import settings on our sounds. If we open up that audio folder and take a look at the import tab next to the scene tab, you can see that there are some defaults that go along with the type of file. OGG files default to loop. WAV files don't do that. So if you don't want it to loop, we can turn that off. For background music or other things like that, you might want it to be looping. But for sound effects, we don't want it to loop. We just want it to play once when the event happens. So we can see if we play the game, even though we have those sounds in there, we don't hear anything. So let's add in those sounds. So let's start with the player. If we go into the player scene, you can see there's already a few sound nodes that are part of the player hierarchy. So those are built into the default project. We'll go over to how to add one of those sounds. And then let's take a look at the code real quick. And if you scroll through the code, you can find at various different points some code that is commented out. So that means that there's a little pound sign or hashtag in front of it. And that means that the Godot engine actually ignores that part of the code. And so I have those commented out so that they won't create an error if there's no sound there. But since we're adding the sound in, what we'll do is add those sounds back in. So just to show you guys how to add in a new sound, what you want to do, let's delete this jump sound, and then we're going to right click on the player and add a new node, and just look for the audio stream player. That's what you need to play any sound in Godot. And once we've got that, we need to rename it jump sound with a capital J and a capital S to match what we saw in the code. And then we can just move it up in the hierarchy again. And once you have that audio stream player node added to your scene, you can go to the inspector and go to stream and click that empty box. And then you'll be able to choose the sound. So we'll go into the audio folder and choose the sound that we want to play with the jump. So then we can go back to the script, find that comment that says jump sound.play. And it's pretty straightforward. Just to quickly explain what that means, the $sign is Godot's shorthand for referencing something in the node hierarchy that's related to the script. So you can see that script is attached to the player, and we can reference anything that's inside of the player node just by using that $sign and then the name of the node. And that has to be exact, like it has to have same capital letters, same spelling, exactly the same. So if we say $sign jump sound dot play, that is going to play our jump sound. So we've added the jump sound. We can just go ahead and use the land sound and the dies sound that are already there. So let's just click on those and go to the stream and choose the correct sounds for that. So the land sound and the die sound. And then let's find those parts in the code. So there's a few more lines of code for the land sound because we have to actually know when the player is landing on the ground, which is its own set of code. And then the dies sound is just down here at the bottom when the player dies or we have a game over. So that's pretty easy. We can find that and just remove the hashtag or pound sign from the front of those lines. And those sounds are going to play when we play the game. So at this point, you should have sound playing. If you don't, let me know. We can take a look at it and try to fix things. But now we can go into some of our other scenes and add the other sounds that we created. Let's just go in order. We can go into the life scene. And this is just when you collect a life. If you lost a life, you can add a new life back. And that is the collected sound. So we can go and find that. We made a sound for that called item_life. You'll notice that collected sound doesn't match the name of the sound. So you can really put any sound you want to in there. The only thing that has to match is the name of the audio stream player node and the name that we reference in the code. You can also change the code if you add more sounds or you want to use a different name. But just using the defaults that we have, we're going to look for that collected sound and remove that hashtag for the collected sound.play. Okay, let's go ahead and do the item, the little apple as well before we test it. So we'll click on the item scene and then go to the collected sound. And this actually uses the exact same script as the life scene. So we don't have to update the script here. We've already done it. We just have to choose the sound. And now both of those should work. So let's give that a try. And so we can see the life sound and the apple both play their different sound effects. So that looks like it worked. One thing I might want to change is I might want to actually edit my sound. So that apple sound was like a little too long. And so the best way to do that is to leave Godot and then go find my file and then edit using Audacity. Audacity is a really great, simple audio editing program that is free to use. And so you've probably used it before if you've taken like MMP 100 or something, but if not, let me know. We could go over some basics, but all you really have to do is open up the sound in Audacity, find the section that you want and just cut out the rest. So I'm just going to do that real quick. So I'm just going to cut out kind of the beginning because I like the way that the end sounds. And once I've got a little bit of a shorter sound that I like, so I'm going to do a couple things here. I'm going to normalize the sound. That just makes sure it's like loud. This is something I might want to do with pre-recorded sounds rather than the sounds that we generated. The next thing I want to do is do a fade out at the end because it'll be, if we cut our sounds in the middle of like a loud part, it's going to be really noticeable. It's going to make some like bad clicks in the audio on your computer. So if we fade that out and make sure our sound goes back to 0 before it ends, that's going to sound much better. It's going to mix with things a lot better. So once we've got those edits, we can save this as item_apple.wave. And this one we can import and it will take the place of the OGG file and we'll just add that in there. So I'm just going to give this another, I'm just going to say this is edited so I remember that I edited this in the future. And that's pretty straightforward. Audacity is relatively easy to use, but if you do have any questions and you need to edit something, let me know and we could go over that in more depth together. We've got our edited sound file. We can remove the sound that we had and then switch to that edited file. And I think this is going to sound a lot better because it is a game. We might have like, 10 apples in a row at some point. And so if they're all playing these really long sounds, it's probably going to sound a bit chaotic. So we kind of want short sounds that just kind of punctuate these events in the game, like jumping or getting hit by an obstacle, getting that apple or that life item. Okay, so we just have the obstacles. So let's open up the obstacle moving. This one actually has two different sounds because it can hit the player, but it can also get hit by the player. It can die itself. So let's grab the hit sound first. And this is actually the player hit sound. So this is just an organizational choice here. So when the player gets hit by an obstacle, rather than having the player play that sound, we can have the obstacle play that sound. And the advantage there is if we have a bunch of different types of obstacles, then we don't have to test which obstacle we hit for the player. We can just put different sounds in that same audio stream player for our different obstacles. So that way, that's whatever sound we want, we'll just play. We don't have to change the code or really do anything else. The other sound that the obstacle that's moving can play is when the player hits the obstacle. So that's the obstacle dies. And so let's just put that in there. So then we just have to update the code. Let's click on the script for the obstacle moving and just remove that hashtag or # from the beginning of dies sound and hit sound in the code. You can just look for those and that should update things. And then we can move on to the simple obstacle or the obstacle simple. This just has the hit sound because it's just a stationary obstacle. It can't be hit by the player. So we'll just put player hit sound in there and we can quickly update the code for that as well. We just click on the script and that one's pretty simple. It's right there. Just uncomment hit sound.play. So those sound pretty good. I did all those sound effects like really quickly. I didn't spend a whole lot of time on them. So I recommend you guys play along with that more. Don't just use the first sound effects that you try. Once you hear it inside of the game, you might have some thoughts about how to make it better. And you should definitely go back and kind of tweak those sounds and try new things to really work as well with the game as you can get. Okay, so we could add some more sound effects in there, but I think this is a good overview. I think that'll be enough for you guys to add more sound effects on your own if you have other sounds that you want to put in there. So let's go post this on the Open Lab and do some documentation. So we'll go to the Open Lab and create a new post. And of course, we want to find the category under sound design for the gameplay sound effects. So these are just the sound effects that are part of the game, as we mentioned. And once we got the category, let's just add in a little title. And you might want to explain what you were going for with the sound effects, like if you have a specific style, or if you have a specific setting or place where your game is happening, or where you're imagining these sound effects taking place. So I have these kind of generic video game sound effects, but I also have the apple. So if you have specific sound effects, definitely mention what sound effects you added in there. And then you can actually add in the audio. You can't drag and drop with audio in WordPress. I'm not really sure why that is. But if you click on the little plus button to create a new block, and then you click on audio or type in audio to find it, you'll find that audio. And then you can actually drag your audio onto that new block that gets created. And that'll make a little audio player for you. You can add a caption if you want to give it a name or, label what type of audio this is. And that'll be good for when we look at them in class. And if you're collaborating with another student, they can see what those audio files are. And you can compress those audio files and send them to somebody else if you're collaborating. But you can also download them directly from WordPress using that audio player. So you can share them pretty easily just by making your WordPress post and then sharing it with another student in the class. So let's label these audio files and let's preview what we've got. So we can hear our audio. You can see that download button there. So if somebody else wants to use the audio, of course you should ask permission first, but you guys can collaborate by sharing the sound effects that you created with somebody who's working on maybe the player physics lab. That could be a good place to combine those. So that all looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and publish, and we are done.